The music stopped, but her voice remained. In a room filled with 200 guests, the wedding march had begun only to fall into silence, and then she sang, no orchestra, no accompaniment, just her voice trembling at first, then rising strong, raw, honest. Each note carried more than melody. It carried memory, lost love, and something deeper, forgiveness. Caleb turned, and there she was, Elena. Walking down the aisle, not with flowers in hand, but with a song on her lips, the very one she had written for him after they fell apart. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a moment of return. A story that had started in grief, broken in misunderstanding, and somehow found its way back to love. But how did they get here? How does a grieving boy and a waitress with a hidden voice find each other again, years later, when life has changed them beyond recognition? This is not just a love story. It's a journey of healing, of music, of rediscovering home in the most unexpected person. So if you're ready for a story that will move your heart, stir your soul, and remind you that some songs are meant to find their way back, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because now the story begins. In the grand ballroom of the West Vale Conservatory, the music had stopped, not because of silence, but because of something far more powerful. A single voice. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. But the moment the young woman opened her mouth to sing, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Near the front table, Caleb Harrington, now in his late 30s and sharp in a charcoal suit, leaned forward slightly. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but as though searching for something he had long forgotten. He whispered, almost to himself, "Who is she?" His best friend, Nathaniel Clark. The groom smirked as he followed Caleb's gaze toward the stage, or rather toward the server in a black apron who had somehow ended up with the microphone. "That's not the professional singer we hired. She's staff." Caleb didn't respond immediately. His eyes were still locked on her, the way she stood composed but vulnerable, as if each word she sang was something she had to pull out from beneath her ribs. "She's remarkable." Nathaniel chuckled. "What's her name, you think? Planning to fall in love before the cake's even cut?" But Caleb didn't laugh. He looked as if he were hearing a voice he had met once long ago in some other life. Backstage, or rather behind the kitchen door, Elena Ward. 28 pressed her palm to her chest, trying to still the flutter in her lungs. "You're insane," she whispered to herself. And maybe she was. But when Mara, her co-worker and friend, had begged her only minutes earlier when the scheduled performer had canceled with no warning, how could she say no? Just one song, Mara had pleaded. "If there's no music, I'm out of a job and you're the only one I trust." So Elena had walked out with shaking hands and a throat full of fear. And then something else had taken over. Something older than her worry. Something she'd carried since childhood. Now, as applause echoed behind her, she tried to melt back into the linen and silver world of catering trays and quiet footsteps, but the DJ's voice caught her on her way out. "Let's give it up one more time for Elena Ward." She paused only long enough for a shallow curtsy, then disappeared into the hallway. Mara found her moments later by the champagne cart. That was she searched for the right word. "Honest to God magic, I just need to work," Elena replied, grabbing a tray. "I'm not here to steal anyone's spotlight, I can't afford to." "Nobody thinks that." "Actually," Mara leaned in, "the bride's mother just handed me extra cash and said, 'Tell her she gave us goosebumps.'" Elena managed a tired smile. "Nice, but that doesn't pay Grandma's prescriptions or next month's rent." Mara looked at her, softened. "You know, maybe if you actually sang for a living you wouldn't have to count tips, and maybe the sky would rain violins." Elena muttered, pushing back through the swinging door. The music had resumed. People were dancing. Glasses clinked. And yet, she could feel it the way someone watched her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. He was still there. The man with the careful eyes and the quiet presence seated beside the groom. His gaze never left her. Later, while clearing empty glasses near the bar, she overheard the beginning of a conversation that made her fingertips go cold. The girl who sang the man was saying, "I want to speak with her." Elena didn't need to hear more. She'd met men like him before, men with suits, with charm, with the illusion of interest that never lasted more than a few nights. Men who thought a voice was a door, and they were entitled to walk through it. She slipped away before the groom could respond. That night in the one-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandmother, Elena counted her earnings with methodical hands. Every folded bill was carefully divided: rent, groceries, medicine, nothing left for dreams. "Long night?" asked Mrs. Agnes Ward, entering the kitchen slowly wrapped in her threadbare robe. "Same as always," Elena said. She didn't mention the song. She didn't mention the man, not the applause. Not the way his eyes had made her feel seen and fragile at the same time, and certainly not the thought that kept echoing in her mind long after the ballroom lights had dimmed. Where did she come from? If he only knew. "They're all the same," Nathaniel said, swirling the ice in his glass. "Wealthy men and beautiful waitresses, it always starts with a look and ends in a mess. Just be careful. Caleb, not everyone's made for your kind of world." From across the ballroom, Elena carried a tray piled high with empty glasses, pretending she hadn't heard a word, but his words found their mark anyway, like a pebble tossed into still water, sending quiet ripples across her chest. So that was it. Another man in a tailored suit, intrigued by a voice for one night only. She had met that look before too many times. The curiosity, the flattery, and then the inevitable vanishing act, once they remembered who they were and who she wasn't. That night, back in the tiny apartment she shared with her grandmother, Elena sat at the kitchen table counting her tips in silence. She separated the bills with the precision of someone who couldn't afford mistakes: rent into one envelope, medication into another. Behind her, soft footsteps shuffled across worn tile. "How was the wedding, darling?" asked Agnes, her grandmother, her voice thin but kind. She leaned on the counter, wrapped in a robe faded from too many washes. "The same as always," Gran Elena said, without turning around, "except it wasn't." She hesitated before adding, "The singer didn't show. Mara asked me to fill in." Agnes's eyes lit up, and they clapped. Elena admitted a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "They always do. I've been telling you since you were a little girl. Your voice was never meant to hide in shadows." Elena shook her head. "It doesn't exactly pay the electric bill." Later, after helping Agnes into her favorite chair and making sure she had her evening tea, Elena paused beside her. "How are you feeling today?" Her grandmother took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Better. Now that you're home?" A brief silence passed between them, warm and unspoken. "Meet anyone interesting?" Agnes asked lightly, mischief dancing in her tired eyes. Elena's mind flashed to the man at the head table, the one who had watched her not like a stranger, but as if she'd sung a memory back to life. His name, she remembered from the seating chart, was Caleb Harrington. She shrugged. Just the usual rich crowd, nothing special. But even as she slipped into bed that night, his voice echoed in her mind. Where did she come from? She could have told him. From neighborhoods people locked their car doors in. From rooms with water-stained ceilings and dreams folded beneath rent receipts, from a life full of almosts, and she was no one's passing curiosity. Not again. Across the city in a glass-walled office high above Graybridge, Caleb sat with his elbows on the desk, eyes fixed on the horizon, but seeing nothing. 2 weeks had passed since the wedding. 2 weeks, and he still heard that voice in his sleep. Caleb. The sound of his cousin's voice cut through the silence. Mason Harrington, younger by 2 years and always too sharp for his own good, leaned casually against the doorframe. You've been off ever since you came back from France. Meeting starts in 20 minutes. Caleb blinked, dragging himself back into the room. I was thinking about the expansion pitch. Sure you were? Mason smirked. Looked more like the face you made at the wedding. You remember when that waitress started singing and you forgot how to breathe? Caleb didn't respond. Come on, Mason added, checking his watch. The numbers for the new tech campus are solid. We break ground in 6 weeks. Once Mason had gone, Caleb reached for his phone. He didn't hesitate this time. Nate, he said when his friend picked up the woman who sang at your wedding. Do you know her name? Nathaniel chuckled. I was wondering when you'd ask. It's not like that, right? You're just professionally intrigued. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. I think I know her. Or at least, I knew her voice a long time ago. You're serious? I was 16, Caleb said softly. The day of my mother's funeral. There was a girl. She sang just one song. I never saw her again, but I never forgot the sound. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That was over 15 years ago. Nathaniel said quietly, You really think it's her? I don't know, Caleb murmured, but I need to find out. Am I really going to walk up to her and say, Hey, remember the day my mother died? Caleb said quietly, the weight of the thought settling in his chest like a stone. I don't know, man, Nathaniel replied from the other end of the line, but I think you need to figure it out. Look, the event coordinator might know how to reach her Mara. Something I'll send you her number. 3 days later, Caleb sat alone in the back corner of Maison Riverstone, the upscale bistro where the reception had taken place. The restaurant was quiet at this hour, the afternoon light slanting through tall windows, throwing soft shadows across the floor. He was nervous in a way that felt strange, almost unfamiliar. He hadn't felt this way since he was a boy. His palms were damp, his heart too loud. When Mara Jensen finally walked in, she wasn't alone. Elena was with her. Caleb instinctively leaned back into the shadows of the alcove hidden by a decorative column. His chest thudded painfully. I still don't get it, Elena was saying as they walked. Why would someone want to hire me without even meeting me? Mara gave a gentle shrug. They saw you perform at the wedding. They were impressed. The offer is 3 nights a week, steady pay and no dishes to wash. Elena hesitated, glancing around the empty restaurant. It feels strange. What feels strange, Mara replied, is you serving drinks when you sound like you belong on a stage. Caleb watched as sunlight caught the side of Elena's face, the slope of her cheek, the eyes he hadn't been able to forget. The last time he saw them, they were filled with quiet kindness and something like understanding. Now they held guarded suspicion. I'll think about it, Elena finally said, arms folding around her torso like armor. Your grandmother's medication isn't getting cheaper, Mara reminded her softly. Elena's shoulders sank. Fine. When do I start? From his hiding place. Caleb let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He stayed away after that. For nearly 2 weeks, he let Elena slip into her new role without interference. He asked the restaurant manager for updates, nothing invasive, just enough to know she was still singing, that patrons loved her, that her voice made even the loudest nights feel still. And then, one Tuesday, he decided it was time he arrived early, took a quiet table in the back. Waited. When Elena stepped onto the stage, the room wasn't full, just a few scattered guests finishing late dinners or sipping from heavy glasses. She wore a simple black dress. Her hair, no longer tied back, fell gently over her shoulders. There was no trace of the waitress, who had once slipped between tables unnoticed. Her first song was something soft, aching and slow, the kind of melody that made people pause mid-bite without knowing why. Caleb closed his eyes. He was 16 again. It was raining. The chapel was filled with flowers and the sound of quiet weeping. And then, that voice. One clear note, then another, and for a moment the grief inside him had stilled. After her set ended, she bent to gather her sheet music. Caleb stood, walked slowly toward her. Excuse me. She turned surprised. Recognition flashed across her face. You're the best man. From the wedding. Caleb Harrington, he said, offering a hand. Your performance was beautiful. Elena shook it briefly. Her smile was polite, nothing more. Thank you. Enjoying your dinner. Actually, I came to hear you sing. Her expression cooled, a slight shift in her gaze. How nice I think we've met before, he continued gently. A long time ago. I doubt that, she said quickly, slipping her music into a folder. I'd remember someone like you. It was a funeral. My mother's, actually. You sang a piece, Ave Maria. You couldn't have been more than 13. Her hand froze over the folder. Her eyes studied his face. You, she said at last, her voice quieter. You were the boy who sat alone in the front row. You didn't stop crying. Caleb nodded, his throat tightening. You sat beside me. Told me your voice came from your father, and that just for that day, it could belong to me. Elena looked away, and when she looked back, something had softened. I remember your mother. She was kind. My grandmother worked for her. Agnes, Caleb whispered. I didn't realize. Why would you? Her tone had cooled again. We came from very different worlds. Still do. That's not fair, he said. You don't know me. Oh, but I do, she replied, her voice like silk edged with steel. You're the one who hides behind anonymous offers and thinks a steady paycheck equals redemption. He stepped back slightly, stung. I didn't come to take anything from you. Then what do you want? He looked at her. Truly, looked. I want to understand why a song from 15 years ago still follows me. Why a voice I only heard once still feels like something I was meant to find again. Elena didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. I just wanted to help Caleb, said voice low as if the truth needed to be handled gently. Elena slung her satchel over her shoulder. That's hard to believe when you've lived in my world. She didn't mean it to hurt, but the way he flinched, it landed. Thank you for the opportunity, she added, but I think I should say no. She turned. Please don't. His words caught up to her like a second breath. I know you don't trust me, but this isn't about me. It's about giving your voice the space it deserves. Her steps slowed. She didn't turn around, but something shifted in her shoulders. Not quite forgiveness, but the absence of resistance. I'll think about it, she said softly. As she walked away, Caleb stood in the quiet, watching her silhouette move toward the door, like the end of a song he wasn't ready to forget. For what it's worth, he called after her, your voice still helps, just like it did back then. She paused. She didn't look back, but he saw it. The stillness. The breath caught in her ribs. The part of her that even after all these years still remembered being a girl who once sang for a grieving boy. A few days later, in a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a pharmacy, Elena stirred her coffee without sipping it. Across from her, Mara raised an eyebrow. So, you're keeping the job? Elena sighed, her thumb pressing into the ceramic rim of the cup. I need the money. Grandma's new prescription costs twice what the last one did. And that has nothing to do with the very well-dressed man who keeps showing up to hear you sing. Caleb Harrington is not why I'm doing this, Elena said a little too quickly. Her words held more defense than certainty. Mara tilted her head. You sure? Elena stared into her untouched drink. It's complicated. Try me. She hesitated. His mother was kind to us. My grandmother was her housekeeper for nearly a decade. I sang at her funeral when I was just a kid. He remembered me. Mara blinked. That sounds like something out of a movie. It's not, Elena replied, because in real life people like him live in buildings that touch the sky, and people like me wonder if the rent will eat through the food budget. Mara smiled, and sometimes those two worlds meet in unexpected ways. Elena rolled her eyes. This isn't one of your love stories. Mara. But over the next few weeks, Caleb kept showing up, always at the same table, always quietly listening, always staying until the final song faded into silence. One evening, after a set of original songs she hadn't meant to perform, she found him waiting by the stage door. His coat collar turned up against the night breath visible in the autumn chill. "You sang something new tonight," he said. "I'm trying some things," Elena replied, wrapping her scarf a little tighter. "Finding the edges of what my voice can do." "I liked it," he said, then paused. "Would you maybe have dinner with me sometime? Just to talk about music." She narrowed her eyes. "Just music, and maybe why you've spent the last 3 weeks dodging anything personal." She laughed, a quick, surprised sound. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "I've learned not to waste time." She studied him for a long moment. "Fine one dinner." "As colleagues." His smile was quiet and real. "I'll take it." He didn't take her to a rooftop or a 5-star bistro. Instead, he brought her to a little family-run restaurant in a corner of Eastwind she hadn't visited since high school. The owner greeted him with a bear hug. "You know this place?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "I grew up 6 blocks from here," Caleb said, pulling out a chair for her. "Antonio, the guy who runs the place, helped me pass calculus when I was trying to get a scholarship. Wouldn't let me leave until I could recite formulas while folding napkins." She blinked. "I thought you were born into privilege." Caleb smiled, wistful. "My father drove a cab. My mother cleaned houses. Everything I have now, I built after they were gone." That quiet, invisible wall around her began to shift. Not fall, not yet, but tilt. They talked over warm arepas and plantain stew. He told her about starting his company in a borrowed garage, about years in Spain and California, about returning, not because he had to, but because he couldn't stop thinking about the neighborhoods people forgot. "I know it sounds cheesy," he admitted, "but I came back to try and do something that mattered." She rested her chin on her hand. "Tech is great, but sometimes what communities need most isn't code or data." He smiled, like music. She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "What about you? What's your dream now that you've built the skyscraper?" He looked at her for a long time. "You tell me yours first. What did you dream of?" Caleb asked gently, before life interrupted. Elena lowered her gaze to the untouched food in front of her, the candlelight catching the soft curve of her lashes. "I wanted to study at the conservatory," she said after a pause. "Not just sing, learn, teach. Open a small studio for kids who couldn't afford lessons. Music should belong to more than just the privileged." "What happened?" "Reality," she replied simply. "My parents died in a car crash when I was 16. After that, it was just me and Gran. I finished high school, took whatever work I could find. Bills came first. Survival came first." Caleb didn't speak. He just listened, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet respect that made her chest ache a little. In the weeks that followed, their conversations became longer, unguarded. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply showed up at her shows, at her quieter sets on Thursday nights, always at the corner table, always watching with the same still wonder. And slowly, she stopped pretending not to see him. Some evenings they'd talk for hours afterward about lyrics and composers, about growing up in 2 different versions of the same city, about what it meant to chase something that kept running faster than you could. Then one evening, he picked her up in a car far too understated for someone with his bank account. "Where are we going?" she asked, as the skyline slipped behind them. "You'll see," he said, smiling without explanation. They arrived at a sleek modern building on the edge of the Eastwind district, glass and steel. But there was warmth in the way the lobby smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. "This is your company," Elena realized. He nodded. "I want to show you something." He led her down a quiet hallway into a room where large blueprints were spread out across a long table. Diagrams, rooms, labels. She stared. "What is this? A music school?" he said, voice alight. In our old neighborhood. With scholarships, free instruction recording space, a community stage, a place for kids who sing the way you once did. Elena blinked. You're serious. I want you to run it. She took a step back. Me as director. Her hands went cold. Caleb, I can't accept that. Why not? It's everything you dreamed of. No. Her voice cracked slightly. It's everything I dreamed of. Being handed to me by someone else. Don't you see? If I say yes, I'll never know if I earned it, or if it's just another gift from someone who feels sorry for the girl with the voice. Caleb's face fell. You think I'm doing this out of pity? No, she said. But I need to know. I can build something on my own, even if I'm standing next to someone who loves me. The last word slipped out before either of them was ready. Caleb's eyes locked onto hers. I do love you, Elena. I think I started falling for you the moment you opened your mouth at that wedding. Or maybe even before, when you sat beside a grieving boy and gave him peace without even knowing it. Elena couldn't breathe. You don't have to say anything, he added. But don't walk away from this, because you're afraid it came too easily. This school, it's not about me. It's for the kids who need what you never got. She looked down at the blueprints, tracing the lines with trembling fingers. I need time. He nodded. Take all the time you need. The offer won't disappear. Neither will I. That night in their small kitchen, Elena told her grandmother everything. Agnes listened quietly, the soft ticking of the clock filling the silence between their words. Well, Elena asked when she finished, what do you think? Her grandmother gave her a small, wise smile. That boy always had a good heart, even when he barely knew how to carry it. Elena sat down beside her, still uncertain. But what if people think I'm only with him for the money? Agnes tilted her head. Since when do you care what people think? I don't know, Elena whispered. Maybe I'm not afraid of what they think. Maybe I'm afraid of what it means if I let myself love him back. Agnes didn't push. She just reached over and folded her hand around Elena's. Then ask yourself this: are you afraid of love or of being loved well? That night, as the city exhaled outside her window and moonlight spilled across the floor, Elena realized something quietly terrifying. Her walls had started to fall, and the man on the other side wasn't the millionaire in a penthouse. He was the boy from her past who had never stopped believing in her voice. It wasn't the first time he had said it. You could wake up to this view every day, Caleb murmured, handing her a mug of coffee, as the soft light of morning spilled across the skyline. Elena took the cup, her fingers warming around it. She didn't meet his eyes. You've said that before, and I'll probably keep saying it. She offered a half smile, then sipped quietly, watching the city stretch beneath them, too bright, too far from where she came from. The music school was nearly finished. Against the tangle of fears and pride inside her, she'd said yes, maybe because she believed in it, maybe because she believed a little more each day in the boy who'd never really left their old neighborhood. She'd seen the joy in the kids' faces when they toured the dusty halls that would soon become their sanctuary. That had mattered, that had silenced her doubts. The opening's in 2 weeks, Caleb said, breaking the quiet. The mayor confirmed he's coming. Elena sighed. Do we really need that much attention, Banners Press? It's not about headlines, he explained. It's about showing people what's possible when two worlds decide to meet halfway, and attention means funding growth opportunity. She nodded, though unease curled in her chest. Since the day their relationship became public, the stares had followed, some polite, some not. And then there was Mason, Caleb's cousin, whose eyes carried questions he never voiced, but made sure she felt anyway. Will your cousin be at the opening? She asked lightly. Caleb's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. Probably why, no reason, she said too quickly. Later they walked through a quiet park tucked behind his building, the city muffled by trees and wind. He reached for her hand and held it, not like a gesture, but like a grounding. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, stopping near a bench, "about why I left." "You don't have to explain." "I do," he insisted. "You think I walked away from where we came from, and you're right, I did." He looked down at their hands. "After my parents died, I couldn't be in that house anymore. Every sound, every corner was a memory I couldn't carry. My aunt took me in. I buried myself in work, in building something that might make them proud. And it did," Elena said softly. "They would be proud. So proud." He looked up at her, a question stirring. "And what about you? There's still so much I don't know." "Like your marriage." She stilled. "How do you Mason mentioned it?" He said quickly. "Said you were married briefly, to a professor." "Of course he did," she muttered. Stepping away, the air around her thickening. "Why didn't I tell you? Because it's not a story people like to hear." He waited. His name was Thomas. He taught at the community center's music program. He was kind, brilliant, and dying. She glanced at him, her voice lower. "He had no family. I was 22, and he asked me to stay, not out of love, but so he wouldn't be alone through chemo and hospice. We married so he could leave me his instruments, his music archive. He wanted it to go to someone who would use it, not lock it in a storage unit." Caleb's eyes softened. "After he died," she continued, "his relatives contested the will, said I'd manipulated him, called me a liar, a thief." "What happened?" Caleb asked gently. "The court sided with them. I didn't fight it. I couldn't take any more of being looked at like that." She turned to him, "Then all walls stripped away. That's why I move carefully. Why I hesitate, because I've seen what people can believe when they want to tear something down." He stepped forward, arms wrapping around her. "I'm sorry you had to carry that alone." She let herself lean into his warmth for just a moment, then pulled back, looking into his eyes. "That's why I'm scared of the school of us. You don't get to ignore what people whisper in your world. I don't care what they whisper," Caleb said, steady and sure. "You should," she replied, "because in your world, perception isn't just noise, it's currency." 2 weeks later, the old building was unrecognizable. Once hollow and forgotten, now it gleamed with hope. Fresh paint, polished floors, windows that welcomed sunlight like an old friend. Inside, laughter-echoed music equipment had been installed. Instruments lined the walls, a small recording room nestled in the back corner. Elena stood just inside the doorway, watching neighborhood kids explore with cautious wonder, like they couldn't believe they were allowed to touch the piano, let alone play it. And for a moment, despite the cameras, the donors, and the carefully dressed guests arriving for the grand opening, she felt calm. She belonged here, at least for now. In one corner of the music school, a small recording studio quietly hummed with newness. Children wandered between keyboards and violins, their laughter threading through the bright, airy halls like wind through open windows. The building, once a forgotten shell, now pulsed with life. Elena, graceful in a modest blue dress, led the mayor through the classrooms with quiet pride. Her posture was poised, but her heart beat fast. This wasn't her world. Not really, but today, it almost felt like she belonged. A few paces away, Caleb stood speaking with a cluster of donors. He glanced at her often, the way someone looks when they can't believe what they're seeing, or maybe what they're afraid to lose. "Impressive work," said a voice behind him. Caleb turned to see Mason approaching, glass of champagne in hand, expression unreadable. "Quite the achievement," Mason added. "Though I can't help but wonder about the funding, all those generous donations, all that trust." Caleb stiffened. "Everything's documented. You have the reports. I wasn't talking about the numbers, Mason said smoothly. I meant the person you've put in charge of them. Caleb's jaw tightened. Don't do this. Why not? Mason replied. You're about to put her in front of an entire city. Shouldn't they know who she really is? Before Caleb could respond, Mason was already moving, cutting through the crowd toward the stage where the mayor had just finished praising the school as a model of community and innovation. Elena was invited to speak next. Her voice was steady, filled with quiet conviction, as she thanked the people who believed in something that didn't yet exist. She spoke of children who would now have music where silence used to be of classrooms filled with sound instead of empty echo, and for a moment, Caleb let himself feel proud. Proud of her. Proud of this. Until Mason moved. As Elena stepped back from the microphone, she smiled toward Caleb, but her smile faltered when she saw his face. He wasn't smiling back. Mason had intercepted him mid-step, murmuring something as he held up his phone. Caleb's expression darkened. He shook his head, once Mason persisted. Whispers rolled through the audience like a slow wind. Elena's hand resting on the podium curled slightly. She didn't know what had been said, but she knew that something had shifted in the room and in him. Caleb finally broke away and climbed onto the stage, but the light in his face was dimmed. After his speech, as the crowd scattered to mingle, Mason stepped back up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, tapping it once. May I have just a moment? The room fell still again. Caleb's stomach turned. As Chief Financial Officer of Harrington Technologies, I believe in transparency, especially when it comes to projects funded by public and private investment. Mason, don't. Caleb's voice cut across the room, but Mason pressed on. Our new director, he said calmly, has an interesting history. Before she became a waitress, Miss Elena Ward was briefly married to a wealthy music professor. He died leaving her nothing due to a prenuptial agreement. Gasps, cameras, a rustle of movement. Elena stood frozen color draining from her face. One might question, Mason concluded, eyes locking onto her, a pattern in the men she aligns herself with. Enough. Caleb stormed the stage and ripped the microphone from his cousin's hand. His voice thundered through the speakers, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Journalists surged forward, shouting questions. Elena. Is it true? Why didn't you disclose your past? Caleb fought through the crowd, but by the time he reached the space where she had stood only moments ago, she was gone. That night, the city outside his penthouse glowed with indifference. Caleb pounded on the apartment door. Breath-ragged Elena, he called. Please. It was Agnes who answered. Her eyes were tired, lined with a quiet grief that made his heart sink. She's not here, the old woman said simply. Where is she? She asked me to tell you. Not to look for her. Caleb stepped back, stunned. I didn't believe him, I swear to you. I didn't believe a word. Mason said. Agnes looked at him, not angry but disappointed. Maybe not, she said softly. But you hesitated, even if it was only for a second. He leaned against the door frame, the weight of her words pressing down. I need to explain. You had your moment. Caleb. Her voice held no cruelty, only finality. And she saw what she needed to see. The door closed gently, and he was alone. What am I supposed to do now? Caleb's voice was low, almost breaking. He stood in the narrow hallway, shoulders slumped like someone who had run out of battles to fight. Agnes didn't answer right away. She studied him carefully, her eyes not angry, but clear-sharp. Prove you're the man I always thought you were, she said softly, the one who deserves someone like her. 6 months passed like smoke. The music school had opened as planned. Children filled its halls. Laughter echoed in the practice rooms. The mission stayed alive, but the soul of the place was missing. Elena was gone. And Caleb. Caleb showed up to work, but never really arrived. Spreadsheets blurred in front of him. Meetings became background noise. Nothing mattered. Not in the way she had. A knock on his office door pulled him back to the present. "Come in," he said without looking up. Mara stepped inside a folder in her hands. "You wanted to see me." He nodded already, knowing what he'd ask. "Anything." Mara hesitated. "No. I've tried everything. Agnes doesn't say more than she ever did, and Elena. She trailed off. She doesn't want to be found." Caleb turned toward the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass. "I can't stop trying. It's been half a year, Caleb. Maybe it's time to..." "To what?" He turned sharply. "Move on." He didn't say it in anger. Just disbelief, as if those two words could ever fit into the space Elena had left behind. He had learned in those months the full cost of silence, of hesitation, of not speaking when it mattered, and it hurt more than anything his cousin had done. Mason's public betrayal. The lies, the accusations had been exposed soon after that disastrous night, embezzlement fraud, and a desperate attempt to destroy Elena before she uncovered it. Caleb had fired him, filed charges. But none of it rewrote what she'd seen in his eyes that night. Even for just a second, she had seen doubt, and that had been enough. "She's stronger than you give her credit for," Mara said quietly. "She always has been." That evening, Caleb drove across town toward a neighborhood he now knew better than most maps. The small apartment above the florist shop, the one Elena used to share with her grandmother, looked just the same. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Agnes opened the door. Her face softened. "You're early today, I brought your medicine," he said, holding up the pharmacy bag along with a brown paper bundle of mangoes and tea leaves. "Always so thoughtful," she said, stepping aside. "Coffee's on." They sat at the tiny kitchen table where he'd shared many quiet, wordless afternoons with her, but today he noticed the slump in her shoulders, the fatigue behind her eyes. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just old," she replied with a half smile. "Doctor says the heart's a little more stubborn than it used to be." Caleb frowned. "Do you need a specialist? I can make a call." "There's nothing they can do that isn't already being done," she said, patting his hand. "Don't look so worried. I've lived a long life." "Don't say that," Caleb whispered. "Please." Agnes's eyes glistened. "You remind me of your mother. She carried everyone else's weight before she ever let anyone carry hers." He looked away, throat tightening. "I miss her. Especially now." "She would be proud of you," Agnes said. "Not for the company, not the buildings, but for this." She gestured to the pharmacy bag. "For how you show up even when it hurts." She paused, then her voice shifted firmer now. "If something happens to me..." "Don't say that," he interrupted. "Listen," she said, squeezing his hand. "If something happens, Elena will need you, even if she doesn't want to admit it." He held her gaze. "Do you know where she is?" Agnes was quiet. Then slowly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn postcard. The edges curled, a smudge of salt, a faint scent of sun and seawater. "She's in Santa Marina," Agnes said, "working at a little restaurant by the water called El Canto del Mar. She sings there. For tourists." Caleb stared at the handwriting on the back. His heart stopped for a beat. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because life is short," she said, "and love is too rare to waste on silence and pride." She looked him in the eye. "Go to her. Promise me you won't tell her." "I told you." Agnes had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She needs to believe it was your heart that led you to her, not mine." 2 days later, Caleb found himself standing on the edge of the Caribbean, the warm breeze tugging at his sleeves as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops of Santa Maris. The town was beautiful. Postcard, beautiful with colonial facades and salt-worn shutters and the sea shining like glass. Under any other circumstance, he might have paused to take it in. But not today. He found El Marinero, the beachside restaurant Agnes had described. It wasn't grand, just a scattering of tables under string lights, open to the sand and sky. Music drifted from the far corner, where a small wooden stage stood waiting. Caleb sat at a corner table, heart beating too fast. And then he saw her. She moved effortlessly between tables, her hair lighter from the sun, her skin carrying the bronze glow of a life spent outside under something warmer than city light. But what struck him most was her smile. It wasn't the polite, measured one she wore at galas or interviews. This one was open, unburdened. She looked for the first time in so long, like someone who had stopped running. The stage lights flicked on as the sun kissed the horizon. She climbed the few steps without announcement, picked up a guitar, and sat down. Then she sang. The voice that left him breathless 6 months ago had changed. It had deepened. There was something rawer now, not broken, but weathered wiser. She sang a song he didn't know. Something she must have written herself. It was a song about loss, about leaving, and about finding your way back, not to a place, but to yourself. When the last chord faded into the hush, the applause was immediate. Caleb clapped too, though his hands trembled, and then, as if drawn by something unseen, her eyes found his. She froze, her smile vanished. But she didn't run. Instead, she offered him a single brief nod before turning back to the microphone to begin another song. He waited through every note, every verse, one beer untouched, sweating on the table. When her set finally ended, she stepped down and made her way toward him. Her expression was unreadable, not cold, just careful. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Skipping any pleasantries I had to see you? How did you find me? Does it matter?" She looked around the restaurant, her body tense. "I'm working." "Caleb, I can't do this now." Then when he asked, his voice, quiet, "Tonight, tomorrow, 6 months from now, when you vanish again." Her eyes flared. "That's not fair." Neither was leaving without letting me explain. A man in a kitchen apron approached, eyes narrowing. "Everything okay, Elena? This guy bothering you?" She shook her head. "It's fine. Miguel, just an old friend from the city." Miguel didn't look convinced, but walked away. Elena turned back to him. "I finish at 9. If you want to talk, meet me at the end of the pier." 2 hours later, they walked in silence, the pier creaking softly beneath their feet, the moon casting silver across the waves. "You look different," Caleb said at last. "Good. Happy I am," she replied. "This place, it gave me space. I've been writing. Playing living." "I'm glad," he said and meant it, though the ache in his chest made the words heavy. She stopped walking. "How did you find me?" He hesitated. "No one sent me," he said truthfully. She held his gaze. "Caleb, I need to know. I've been searching for you since the day you left." She nodded slowly, starting to walk again. "I saw the articles Mason was arrested." He sighed. "Embezzlement. He was stealing from the company. That's why he went after you. He thought you'd lead me to the truth." She looked at him for a long time. "And did you believe what he said about me?" He stopped. "I didn't believe it. Not for a second. But I hesitated. And for that, I'll never forgive myself." Elena didn't speak for a while. When she did, her voice was steady. "I have a life here now. I write songs. People listen. A producer from Bogota heard me last week. He offered me a contract." Caleb swallowed. "That's amazing." "It is. Are you going to take it?" She looked out over the water, then back at him. "I don't know yet. For the first time in my life, I have choices. That means more than you can imagine." "I can imagine," Caleb said quietly. They stood there with the ocean whispering at their feet, and a future neither of them could quite name waiting, just out of reach. "That's incredible," Caleb said quietly, though his heart felt like it was folding in on itself. Elena stood beside him, the moonlight catching in her hair, her voice tinged with both pride and hesitation. It would mean moving to Spain for 6 months, she continued. I'd be working directly with a team in Barcelona, producers, songwriters. It's the kind of opportunity I used to think only belonged to other people. Spain, Caleb echoed. The word tasted foreign on his tongue. That's far. She nodded. I know. When would you leave? If I accept? Next month. He turned, resting his elbows on the railing of the pier. The sea beneath them was black and infinite. And will you accept? She joined him at the edge, the wood creaking softly under their weight. I haven't decided. It's everything I've ever wanted to be heard, really heard. To share something that came from my own hands, my own hurt. Then you have to go. Caleb said, his voice low. Even if it means being apart. She looked at him, startled. Apart. He faced her, then, eyes clear, despite the ache behind them. I lost you once. Because I hesitated. Because I let silence speak louder than love. I won't make that mistake again. Her lips trembled. If you go to Spain, I'll wait for you. If you want to stay here, I'll move to Santa Maris. Whatever it takes. Whatever you need. Tears welled in her eyes. It's not that simple, she whispered. It is to me, he replied. I love you. I've loved you since before I understood what love costs. And I'll keep loving you no matter where you sing. And what about your life? Your company. The school. None of it means anything if I'm not building it with you in the picture. Elena looked down, wiping a tear from her cheek. I need time. I know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card. I'll be staying at the Santa Lucia Inn for the next week. After that, well, you know how to find me. As they parted at the end of the pier, Caleb resisted every instinct to pull her into his arms. Instead, he watched her walk away, bathed in moonlight, as beautiful and untouchable as a prayer. He prayed it wouldn't be the last time. 1 year later, Elena stood in the quiet of a sunlit dressing room, the soft rustle of fabric, the only sound. The mirror reflected back a version of herself she barely recognized, not because of the dress, though it was beautiful in its simplicity, flowing in ivory layers to the floor, but because of the calm in her eyes. You look radiant, Lucia said, adjusting the delicate sprigs of white flowers in her hair. Elena smiled nervously. What if I forget the lyrics? You wrote the song. Lucia laughed. Besides, if anyone can sing at their own wedding without falling apart, it's you. The journey back to this moment hadn't been easy. After Caleb found her in Santa Maris, Elena had taken the leap. She accepted the offer. 6 months in Spain turned into 7, then nearly 8. The days were long, the work consuming, but her music grew, her voice matured. The album launched to critical acclaim, but even with glowing reviews and sold-out showcases, something was missing. Home 3 months in, when Agnes's health began to decline. Elena flew back without hesitation. She returned to Madeira to find Caleb already by her grandmother's side. Specialists called a private suite, arranged warm meals left by the hospital bed each evening. They never discussed us, they didn't have to. They simply began again quietly, with hands held in waiting rooms and coffee shared in silence, and it was there, in the most fragile of places, that something steady began to grow. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Is my granddaughter ready? Agnes peeked her head in her blue dress, more regal than frail. Elena turned, her voice catching, as ready as I'll ever be. Agnes stepped into the room, her eyes shimmering. Your parents would be so proud. I wish they could be here. Agnes smiled gently and placed her hand over Elena's heart. They are. Every part of you is a piece of them. Downstairs. Nearly 200 guests filled the main hall at Casa Rivera. The choir of children from the music school had just finished performing. Now the air was thick with anticipation. Outside the door, someone waited, and this time, she was ready to meet him there. Caleb stood at the front of the hall, palms clammy. Despite the cool air, Nathaniel, his best man, leaned in with a quiet smirk. "Breathe. You look like you're about to collapse. What if she changes her mind?" Caleb whispered. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "She wrote an entire album about how much she loves you. I think you're in the clear." Laughter stirred softly through the guests as the wedding march began, and then, without warning, it stopped. The room stilled. Then came the first note, not from a piano, not from a speaker. From her Elena's voice, soft and sure, filled the space like light pouring into a long-closed room. The melody was unfamiliar, but the emotion was unmistakable. It was the song she had written for him during the months apart, a song of distant discovery and the ache of unfinished love. The doors opened. There she was, walking slowly down the aisle hand in hand with Agnes, her voice carrying not just lyrics but truth, her truth, no veil, no fear, just her radiant and real. Caleb's heart clenched. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, only listen as her voice reached him before her feet did, each note wrapped around him like a memory made new. When she reached the altar, her song ending in a hush that clung to the rafters, she slipped her hand into his. "You really don't do anything halfway, do you?" He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Never have she smiled. The ceremony was short, honest, sacred. When it came time for vows, Caleb spoke not of promises but of second chances of finding home, not in places or titles, but in a person's quiet presence, in forgiveness. In starting again, Elena spoke of trust, of learning to let herself be loved, of how music had led her to many stages, but only one had made her tremble, the one where he waited. Later, as they swayed together on the dance floor surrounded by family friends and flickering lights, Caleb pressed his cheek to her hair. "Happy?" he asked. She nodded against his shoulder. "More than I ever imagined I could be." From a nearby table, Agnes watched them with eyes that shimmered. When the song ended, she motioned for them. "I have something to tell you," she said as they sat beside her. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." "What is it, Gran?" Elena asked gently. Agnes looked at Caleb, her voice lower now. "You know I worked for your mother for years." He nodded. "What you don't know is how deeply she worried for you after your father passed. She said, you were too quiet, too serious for a child." Caleb leaned forward. "I never knew. One day she came to visit while Elena was at the center. She heard her singing, just humming really, and she stopped in her tracks. Agnes smiled. She said to me, 'My son will need something beautiful to hold on to the day I leave him.'" Elena's breath caught. She asked me to invite Elena to sing at her funeral. She said music might reach a place no words could. "You never told me," Elena whispered. "She made me promise not to," Agnes replied. She said, "Some things are better discovered in their own time." Caleb's eyes filled. She believed music could heal the soul. Agnes added, her voice firm, "And if she were here now, I believe she'd see exactly what she hoped for." Elena reached for Caleb's hand, holding it tightly, and in that moment between grief and grace, they both knew their story had never just been about chance. It had been a melody, threaded quietly through time, waiting for the right moment to be heard. Later that night, when the music softened and the guests thinned out, Caleb led Elena to a quiet corner of the garden, lit only by fairy lights. "I never asked you," he said. "Asked me what? That first night at the wedding when I couldn't stop looking at you. What were you thinking?" She smiled. "I was thinking this guy in the expensive suit probably sees waitresses sing every week." And now, Elena touched his face gently. "Now I know that guy in the expensive suit was just a boy from my neighborhood, still trying to find his way home." Caleb pulled her into his arms, and this time, there was no hesitation. "Where did you come from?" Caleb whispered into her hair, holding her close as the celebration hummed softly around them. Elena laughed, resting her forehead against his shoulder. "Same place as you," she murmured. "We just walked different roads to get here." When they rejoined their guests, Elena felt something quiet settle inside her. Not excitement, not adrenaline, something deeper. Peace. The music school was no longer just an idea on a blueprint. It was alive, full of color and sound, laughter and second chances. Children from neighborhoods like theirs were discovering their voices and themselves in ways that once felt impossible. Her music career had grown beyond anything she'd dared to imagine. Her album had opened doors across borders, and her voice, the one that had once only filled empty cafes, now filled concert halls. But more than the applause, more than the awards, she'd found something even rarer. A love that never asked her to choose between who she was and who she was becoming. From across the room, Caleb watched her move through the crowd, greeting old friends, her smile radiant but real. He still couldn't quite believe it, that the girl who once vanished under stage lights had in the end lit up his entire life. She hadn't just surprised the world with her voice. She'd surprised him with the greatest gift of all, a second chance at family, at meaning, at a kind of love he'd never thought he deserved. 5 years later. Caleb sat on the porch of a modest, sun-dappled house tucked in a quiet corner of the city. It wasn't the penthouse people expected him to choose. It wasn't made of glass and steel. It was made of warmth and wood and the sound of life humming through its walls. Inside, he could hear singing, not the bold, stage-worthy kind that earned international acclaim, but a lullaby. Soft, familiar. Elena was putting their daughter to sleep. 3-year-old Mira, named in part for the woman who had first taught Elena to listen closely, her grandmother Agnes, had just drifted off. Agnes had lived long enough to meet her great-granddaughter, and even in her final months had insisted on holding Mira during every song. After she passed, Elena and Caleb had created a music program in her name, connecting young students with elderly mentors in care homes across the city. Finally asleep, Elena whispered, stepping onto the porch. She sank into the chair beside him, exhaling into the stars. "She's stubborn," she added, like her mother. Caleb teased. "I was going to say like her father." They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes easily when there's nothing left to prove. "Did you hear her humming along?" he asked. "Perfect pitch." Elena nodded. "God help us. One musician in the house is enough," she added. 3 albums and 2 awards. Say otherwise. Caleb smiled gently, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat in contented silence, watching the city twinkle below them, and in the far distance the faint outline of the old neighborhood that had first shaped their story. Earlier that day, they'd attended the 10-year anniversary of the first school. One of Elena's earliest students, a boy who years ago couldn't afford a guitar, had performed a song of his own. He was now on his way to study composition in Bogota, full scholarship in hand. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Elena asked, her voice quiet. "Every day," Caleb replied. "Best wedding disaster of my life." Elena laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It wasn't a disaster. The singer got sick." Lucia panicked, and a waitress stepped in. Caleb smiled, finishing the story they'd told so many times, and changed everything. "You were so obvious, you know." Elena teased, her head resting against Caleb's shoulder. Sitting there in that suit, mouth slightly open, Caleb laughed. "I was in shock. The girl from my mother's funeral had grown up and turned into you. That voice, that presence, I didn't stand a chance, neither did I." Elena admitted, turning to look at him. Their journey had never been effortless. They had argued, they had learned hard truths. Balancing a touring music career with the demands of Caleb's expanding foundation meant constant adjustment. Calendars filled and plans shifted. Sometimes they missed each other in the very life they'd built together, but they never missed the point. They'd created something rare, a partnership that didn't shrink either of them, but allowed them to keep becoming, together without losing who they were, alone. Earlier today, Elena said softly. Mira asked me where I came from. Caleb smiled. What did you say? I told her I came from music, from love, and a little bit of courage. She paused. And that one day, she'll find her own answer. Caleb reached for her hand and squeezed gently. And when that day comes, she'll have us to help her look. They sat like that for a while. The world hushed around them. Stars overhead, the soft rhythm of their daughter's breath rising and falling inside the house behind them. Two people shaped by grief and grace. The girl who once sang at a funeral and the boy who never forgot the sound. The woman who once feared being seen and the man who couldn't look away. That night, as the breeze shifted and the lights of the city flickered like distant memories, Elena looked out and saw, not where she came from, but where she belonged. And Caleb, the man who once measured success in numbers and towers, had discovered something far more valuable. He had found his way home, not the one made of walls, but the one made of a voice and a choice to stay, to grow, and to love. Together they held on, not because the journey had been perfect, but because it had been theirs. And in the quiet of their terrace with the city glowing below and their daughter sleeping peacefully inside, they held on, not to perfection, but to each other, from a funeral to a wedding, from strangers across a crowded room to soulmates building a life with music, memory, and meaning. They were proof that some stories don't begin with grand gestures, but with quiet choices made every day. And maybe that's what love really is, not what happens in one moment, but what survives through every misunderstanding, every distance, every return. If this story touched you, even just a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because here, every voice matters, every emotion is welcome, and every story is a way home.